Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagen. We are finally back here in Studio 130 for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. Happy New Year, gentlemen.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
You want me to say Happy New
I
Year
do.
too? Well, great. I mean,
Okay, good. You don't want me to have a good New Year, do you?
oh, I do.
Okay.
I think if you're having a good one, we're all having a good one.
All right, good. Well, as is usual custom around here, we are trying to fight through technical difficulties. I keep adding layers of complexity to this project, and as I was saying before we went on air, there's no discernible improvement from episode to episode. So, but yet here we are. Okay, so it's been a while, gentlemen. So you're rest and refreshed and ready to tackle the new year.
Mm-hmm.
Legislative session right around the corner. So you got to get ready for that. Chris, did you do anything fun over this? Not necessarily a break, but the holidays and our time away from our listeners.
Boy, I mean, I love being here with the listeners.
Yeah.
But yeah, we spent time with our family and extended family, and it was kind of warm for Christmas standards, so we got the kids outside a lot.
That makes a big difference.
Yep.
John?
It was warm. In fact, I was sharing in pre-production. It was my first Christmas without snow.
Yeah. Well, and you were in the frozen tundra,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Well, not so frozen this year. So the question that I had for you in pre-production, and I suspect maybe there's a listener or two out there, did anyone have to rescue off of an ice floe out in a lake?
No.
You weren't cast adrift into some northern Minnesota
No, I didn't.
frigid waters.
I stayed off the ice.
Yeah.
So John's smart enough not to go out there in the first place when it's questionable.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, there was, you
several
side-by-sides out on shady water, and some guy that tried to land his airplane.
Yes, yeah.
And what happened to that gentleman?
Well, I think his plane went down.
Yeah, didn't land.
And the gentleman in the side-by-side, unfortunately, wasn't able to get out. And then, I mean, it was, you can't go on ice when it's almost 40 degrees and 3 inches of rain.
Is this people just not heeding the warnings that are out there? Because they do tests of how thick the lake ice aren't there, don't they?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are just excited to get out, and because ice fishing is really fun. I mean, it's a fun pastime, and it's and I think people get excited and they forget, and it is. I mean, it's odd to have that warm of December, and it's going to have some economic impact too up there because the ski resorts, the snowmobiling, ice fishing, all that is down.
So what's the greater negative economic impact to northern Minnesota? Is it the winter warmth, or is it the oppressive, progressive fiscal policies coming out of St. Paul?
Progressive economic
policies.
I
just wanted to make sure that
Paul,
Okay.
And I just want to say our last podcast, I think it was our last, was very informative because people back home who are listeners had no idea about our discussion on the flag being changed. And so that had been something that had not been really reported there and was under the radar. So a lot of people found that very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I got some good feedback on that episode.
We sometimes have a narrow audience here, but it is informative for broader than just Iowa fiscal conservatives.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of good reasons to tune into the ITR Live podcast.
That's right, yeah.
All right, good. All right, well, as we said here at the outset, we have the legislative session right around the corner, and kicks off this coming Monday. So things happen fast. It's kind of strange in Iowa politics that week between Christmas and New Year is just quiet. There's very little that happens. And then as soon as you cross the new year, all of that flurry of activity starts. And so, trying to narrow down what are the issues this year. And I think we'll come back maybe later in the week and kind of do a broader look at some of the other issues that might be it. But there's some different quotes that are in the media about from legislative leaders on tax policy heading into this next session. So I thought we could take a look at that. I've also got an article that at itrfoundation.org got put up on session preview. So, we always try and feature the content.
Yes.
But anyway, so I wanted to kind of take a little bit of time to talk about that. So, Chris, just from a 50,000 foot view, from the organization standpoint, what is our goal with regard to tax policy in the coming year?
Bring income taxes down.
Oh, okay,
More.
good.
Yeah.
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 But it's individual income tax rate reductions,
Yep.
acceleration, to
Yep.
just continue that process, right?
We've got additional income, individual or personal, however one likes to think of it, income tax cuts that are going to be phased in over the next several years, ultimately getting us down to a flat 3.9%. But we believe that there is room and the ability to go even further than that. And or whatever's already scheduled, we could probably get to those points a little faster too. So,
Mhm.
and then the additional thing that sits out there is there a path to completely eliminate the income tax? I think there probably is. The question is how quickly could that be done, or how much of a long-term, incremental phase out might that be?
John, your thoughts on that? I mean, you spend a lot of your time kind of with the numbers, monitoring what folks are saying about it. Where are we at, and where might we be able to get this year? From your perspective.
Yeah, I think everything that Chris said was right. I would agree. And I think one thing, first of all, going into this session, Iowa's in a strong fiscal foundation, as we've talked about before. I mean, we've had a series of budget surpluses, and we're approaching an enormous sum in the taxpayer relief fund, at least $3 billion, maybe a little bit over $3 billion. So I think there is a potential for accelerating the existing rate cuts from the 2022 reform bill that created our flat tax. And I think, I heard different goals of maybe a 2.5% flat tax or a 2% flat tax. I think those are very realistic goals. And in addition, I think even phasing out the income tax is becoming more of a realistic goal. And I think it's important to have that conversation, especially as we're seeing other states looking to do the same. And so, we have to keep in mind that Iowa is in competition with not just our neighbors, but 49 other states. And there's been a tremendous wave of states cutting tax rates over the last several years. And I think Iowa has been in a position to do more. And the other thing is I think the reason all this is possible is because the governor and the legislature have committed to conservative budgeting, and that's the key to everything, is being prudent on the budget, keeping spending low, and being able to lower tax rates. And we're going to get to some comments of critics from the left on this, and I'd like to point out.
Are we? Do we even need to entertain their comments?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna yeah.
But I just came back from Minnesota, where they just blew a huge budget surplus, and basically they're projecting deficits now.
Yeah,
that's not what's happening in Iowa.
Not at all. You said a couple things in there, John, and I do want to get through and read through some of these comments about the 50-state competition going on, and we point out in the foundation article that the tax foundation's ranking, we're up to 33rd. And we were, I think, 45th, 46th on that kind of before we started this path down.
I always say it wrong, but we're in the top 10 worst.
Yeah.
Bottom 10. Bottom 10 is an easy way to say it.
Yeah.
So we're climbing. We're going to continue to climb. We think we get up eventually into the teens on this, maybe lower. Who knows? There's these thinking about, well, definitely the budget and our focus on conservative budgeting. There's, as I see this, and we spent the legislative interim talking to legislators, talking to Iowans, doing analysis of these things, running numbers, looking at all the different ways that what can be done with the taxpayer relief fund, the other surplus dollars, where are we at? And some of this, I know that Senator Dan Dawson, the Ways and Means Committee chairman, we talked with him about there's really three parts of this. There's the acceleration of the current rate cuts, and that it seems that the at least Republican legislative leaders are sort of lined up on that. There's additional rate reductions, which I think we have a really good chance of getting those. And then ultimately the elimination. Well, that's going to be the more challenging one. But there, like you said, there is a path, and I think there's going to be I hate using the word conversation over it, but I think folks are contemplating what that might look like in order to get there. So I guess to start off on that, I want to start, and I'm reading from a Cedar Rapids Gazette article by Aaron Murphy, and he's got quotes from all four legislative leaders in here. The first one in the article is from Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitver. And I think sort of responding to the idea that, what sort of financial position is the state in? This is, quote, financially here in Iowa, we're in the strongest position we've ever been in. So I think
position.
It's a strong position, pretty bold statement. I think it's factually true. And so that makes a conversation about expediting those cuts. There's that first phase of what we talked about, bringing them up sooner, quicker, and getting those in place for Iowans. That's part one of the conversation. Part two is what happens after that. We're able to expedite that a couple of years. It really finishes off the last bill we passed. What do we need to do to add on to it? So referencing those first two components of that. Going on, then, there are comments by House Speaker Pat Grassley. Similar overall theme. We feel that tax cuts and getting money back in the hands of Iowans as quickly as possible is probably the fastest thing we can do to truly impact it, and we're going to be fully engaged in that conversation. Grassley said, the first part of that, I think, looks to be a little more focused than maybe what we had talked about in an earlier episode of trying to actually get that done right away, in line with what Senator Whitver is saying. But here's the other half of the quote. Part of the reason, and John, you'll like this, part of the reason we can do that is we're fortunate as a state. Our economy has continued to stay strong, and we've budgeted in a way that puts us in a position to be able to do things like this. And I think that's absolutely right. And so I think both these two are talking about that in the right way, because it builds off of the discipline they've shown on the budget. And I'll take a slight detour here, because we've heard a lot of noise lately about on the property tax debate, is that cities and counties complaining because they may have to budget differently next year. And this goes back to the point that I've been trying to make, that the state is showing the way, is that they are budgeting in a way that allows them to provide, budgeting in a way that allows them to reduce the burden on Iowans.
Yeah.
Cities and counties are responsible for Iowa's most hated tax, which is the property tax. And they cannot see fit to follow that example to reduce Iowans' property tax burden, but rather complain to the legislature for trying to do something to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think this quote from Speaker Grassley points that out very well, that, it's the budgeting, and the state is doing that.
Yeah.
Locals are not.
Yeah, that it's regardless of the tax, whether you're talking about income or property tax, the source of it is government spending.
Yes.
And that's what's driving it. And so you cannot have tax relief if you continue to increase government spending. And, that I get upset because, for Christmas, I attended a conference and I kept hearing these national speakers criticize the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, basically saying, well, it ran up deficits. No, it did not run up deficits. It actually brought in more revenue. What's driving deficit spending at the federal level is government spending, not tax cuts.
Yeah.
And the same at the local level. These local leaders at the county and city level are complaining because for years, in fact, decades, they've gotten away with basically taking advantage of assessment windfalls and collecting that. And now the legislature has, I would put some mild controls on them, and now they're complaining because they can't, they're being forced to rein in a little bit.
That's exactly right, John. So anyway, I'm going to frame this up at the end, but I think we're in a great position to achieve the first two of those three pieces of the goal, which is to accelerate. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, and to reduce the rates further from the 3.9 that we will ultimately get to and bring that down lower, hopefully to the mid twos. So I know, John, and I can't remember if we were all here for this one. We had a conversation about the revenue reductions when we were talking about the REC and how, well, there's going to be less money, but because of the tax cuts, right?
How they work. That's the whole idea.
Point, okay? And so I know that you're reluctant to do this, but I'm going to take us down the path of a little bit of looking at what the Democrat leaders had to say, because I want to get at this idea of why we're doing and what the intent is and what the goal is, because I think it's important that we make that clear. So earlier in the article, and I think that Aaron Murphy fairly states this, he says the flattening of overall state revenue, which it is, it's largely flat year to year, is being driven largely by reductions in state income tax revenue. I think that's also a fair statement, and that is by design.
But because we have been collecting literally billions of dollars more than we're spending,
right.
So let's start collecting less.
Now, I would add that the reductions aren't quite as big as what was anticipated when those tax bills were passed, but it was the goal to flatten the growth in tax receipts in Iowa. So, okay, good. Mission accomplished for those that wanted to do that. Okay. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes here. One is from House Minority Leader Jennifer Confrist. We think Iowans are feeling the pinch of the economy, the Joe Biden economy, correct?
Yeah, that is federal spending and federal giveaways.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And that tax cuts are not a magic wand solution that addressed all of the cost issues that Iowans are facing. Okay. Let's go back to the goal of tax cuts. It is not to, it's certainly a nice thing to help people survive Joe Biden's economy, to have a little bit more money in their pocket, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to let people keep more of their own money and have
would you read that again?
I knew you were going to enjoy this.
I'm still mad about local governments too.
We think that Iowans are feeling the pinch of the economy and that tax cuts are not a magic wand solution that will address all of the cost issues that Iowans are facing.
Well, first of all, that's true. It's not a magic wand.
No.
And nobody claims it's a magic wand. But she's conflating two things.
Right.
Tax cuts are not meant to deal with the cost issue. In fact, your people in D.C. Have driven up the costs. These are trying to make things more affordable by letting people keep more of their own money in their pockets to be able to afford those things. And if you're telling me that the tax cuts haven't kept pace with the Bidenomics, then I can't do a lot for you other than don't bring Bidenomics to Iowa and think that more government spending is going to be the solution to costs.
Yes. Great. Right, John?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, okay, great.
I mean,
well, I think we're not saying it's a magic wand. We're just saying let people keep more of their money, right? I think it's a very simple thing. The state's collecting too much in revenue. Can we not pay as much, and can we just fairly let everyone benefit from that?
If that model works, then why is California and Illinois, Minnesota in the shape that they're in?
Yeah, that's right. Conference goes on, something about costs for Iowans, housing and child care, and other things as well. We want to look at any tax cut and see who benefits from it. So
first of all, does she want to start subsidizing those things? Because the whole problem with this and the Bidenomics and why things are so expensive is because Washington, D.C. tried to pump money into the economy to make these things more affordable, and all it did was drive up prices. So, again, don't bring that style of economics and government to Iowa.
And I want to, the yardstick by which they're going to measure the validity of tax cuts, the value of them, is who it helps. So if we can steer it to our favorite groups of people, then those tax cuts are good. But if they're applied fairly to everyone, then maybe that they're no good because we haven't handed those out. Similarly, I'm going to go on to Senate Minority Leader Pam Yoakum. We are going to hold Republicans accountable. Does their plan actually help Iowans who really need it, number one? And number two, can we afford it And will it jeopardize essential services long term?
One is a fair question to ask. Like, let's make sure this is working and people are getting their tax cuts.
Yep.
Think they are when everybody gets a cut.
Yeah.
But number two,
can we? We've proven time and again we can afford it. We've just laid out the numbers. We talked about this with Director Paulson. The numbers are out there. Whitver goes on to say later in the article, we've always looked beyond 5 years on this to make sure that it cash flows. So this is more of this just scaremongering that we can't afford it. And frankly, I don't know what else we can do to just say we can. This is just spin. There's just not grounded in any math. So, and again, does our tax plan actually help Iowans who really need it? We just want to keep more of our own money. Why does it have to be targeted to who really needs it? Come on. So anyway, so now that we made ourselves angry with some of that, talking about local governments and
I mean, that might be all we need to cover.
less optimistic tax policy, I think we should probably frame it up, because this whole bit was about what do we think might happen this year.
Yeah.
So John, go ahead.
Well, one thing I think it needs to be kept in mind is that what happens when you cut taxes, especially for businesses, and we saw this with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, especially for small businesses. They were able to keep more of their money, and they were able to not only invest in those businesses, but give raises, hire more people. And so it becomes the question of whether or not, is it better to allow individuals and businesses to have more of their money, or is it better for government to spend that money? And I think history has demonstrated that allowing individuals and businesses to keep that money is much more better. And you said it right. It all this is emotion, and we're seeing this now with the governor being hammered with the refusing the federal money for the summer food program.
Yeah.
And there's a little over $2 million price tag for Iowa to administer that. And liberals have done this very brilliantly, and they play on the emotions. In fact, we look at the Great Society, and we spent trillions of dollars trying to fight poverty. We declared war on poverty. It failed. It was a disaster. And what happened? How did we finally start resolving poverty? It was basically shifting welfare back to the states in the 1990s and creating workfare programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think people should not let the left, just like local governments, scare people that tax cuts are going to lead to disaster, just like these local governments are saying that, if we cut things, you're going to lose fire and police. It's just not true.
That's exactly right. And I do believe that Iowans understand that. Especially understand it when you put information in front of them, which is a big part of what we're trying to do here, is just very clearly explain what's at stake. Iowans are mad about their property taxes. They want their income taxes cut. They understand that is better for not only just their own family budgets, but for the economic strength of the state. And so that's the project that we're on. And so Democrat legislators, local government elected officials, and allies in the media notwithstanding, we are winning on these issues. And so, because I want to put a positive spin on this at the end, we're going to get, I believe, and I think many would agree with me, that we are going to get some big wins this year on tax policy again this year at the Capitol, specifically this year on Iowa's individual income tax, is that I believe we will accelerate the implementation of the previous tax cuts and drive the ultimate rate even lower, and Iowa will be that much stronger for it, and we'll all get to keep that much more of our own dollars, and we'll all be better for it. And we can continue to prove to the nation that what we are talking about works, and what they're doing in Minnesota, Illinois, and California does not.
Yeah, I agree. I think Iowa's going to continue to be the gold standard example for state fiscal policy.
Good. Long may it continue.
Yep.
All righty. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, listeners. We'll hopefully get back with you another legislative preview before the end of the week. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.